Today we're going to talk about core stability and the fact that it takes more than just one exercise to build good quality core stability. Now, all that I'm saying in this tutorial you'll be able to find in my core strength and stability program. It's just this is a little bit more a theoretical type of explanation of it, whereas in the program it's all very practical and everything that I'm saying you will be doing. It's just this will give you a better idea of why you're doing it. Now, with regards to what we're going to talk about in this tutorial, I've got some notes just up on my computer screen here to my left, and I'll be sort of referring to those to try and keep me on track. But what we're going to talk about is I'm going to sort of explain why it takes more than one exercise. I'll explain that in a second. Then I'm going to talk about the 4 exercises that I use to build a foundation, and then I'm going to explain why I use these exercises. You can use other ones, there's nothing wrong with that, but the main aspect of that is why I'm using them, and this is the important bit. Then once we've gone through those, we'll then talk about how we then go about adding another layer on top of it, and what in some respects is good quality core stability, because it's not necessarily what a lot of people think it is. It's much more than that, and I'll explain that when we get there. And then again, I'll talk about some exercises that I would use, or some movement patterns that I would use, and then again I'll explain why, and then at the end I'll sort of summarise everything that we've talked about. So, with regards to no one exercise can give you core stability, it changes as the task changes. So the stability that's required will change based on the task that you're doing. And I'll use the example of carrying a shopping bag, or carrying not necessarily a rucksack because that will go on your back, but carrying a suitcase, carrying a shopping bag, as I've mentioned, on one side. So if we were to say, I'm carrying this in my right hand, what will happen is if it's down by my side, obviously there's going to be muscles working on my right side to be able to hold the weight. But what also is going to be happening is on the left side of the body, the muscles are going to be activating to prevent my body from collapsing that way under the weight of the object that I'm carrying. So that's a key principle of what we're talking about. Because as soon as I change hands, as soon as I go from right hand and put it in my left hand, all of that flips. So all the muscle activation that was on my right side holding the weight transfers over to my left side. And then all the muscle activation that was happening on my left side to keep my spine up, again, will transfer as my hands, or the weight swaps between the hands. And then as I'm taking it from the right side and putting it in the left side, the same will be happening, but around the back of the body. So as the weight comes around the front and I change hands at the front of my body, that stability and muscle activation is going on around the back. So as the weight changes, as the task changes, so does the requirements from the core stability. So this is why it's important to understand that it changes, and then that helps us understand that we need to be using multiple exercises. So the 4 exercises that I choose to build a foundation, now this is what I have to say, this is building a foundation, is the plank, is the side plank, the bridge, and a bird dog. Now the reason I use those, number 1 is the plank will focus mainly on the front of the body, so the anterior muscles of the torso. As I go into side plank, it then moves to the side, so laterally. And if I do a plank on the right side, the right side, it will then be all down the right side of the body, and then obviously vice versa on the left. As I use then a bridge and a bird dog, it will move around the back, glutes, hamstrings, lower back, and up into sort of upper back and shoulders. So just by using those 4 exercises, we're starting to move the stability around. Now those are static exercises, so if we're doing a plank, it's only there. If we're doing a side plank, it's only there. But one of the things we can do to progress is go from a plank position, lift an arm from the floor, which can be an exercise progression in itself, and then roll up into a side plank. So I'm using those 4 exercises, but what I'm able to do is take it from a static position and make it more dynamic. So it gives me a base and a foundation to progress from. Again, if we do bridge, we could keep both feet down. We could then lift one leg up or one foot up, and then we could swap sides. So again, we're transferring where the stability is required, and then the bird dog, it's kind of doing it automatically. So to start with, we're already hitting that principle in the fact that it moves around. So we can then do that with those exercises. What we're also doing is we're building a mind and muscle connection. So when I get a beginner to exercise, which is what the online program is sort of built for. It's built for beginners. Now, with that said, sort of people sort of that are a little bit more advanced, intermediate or more advanced, will gain from it for the very simple reason you're going to be learning these principles that I'm about to talk about all the way through the program. So if you're very good at the exercises, you may not be performing them correctly or performing them in a way that could be most effective. So you will learn that. So the exercises are sort of aimed at a beginner, but the principles that you're learning are, let's just say intermediate and up to advanced. But this is what I teach a beginner when I work with them face to face. I've just taken that and put it online essentially. So we're building a mind-muscle connection. Now, the reason that I use those 4 exercises again is they're simple exercises. It doesn't take a lot of brain capacity to be able to perform those exercises correctly. So we can build that sort of mind-muscle connection. We're also learning basic joint movement and movement awareness. So what that means is, number one, when we're in a plank, we haven't got a lot of the body to focus on apart from the tummy. So, or the same in the bird dog. So we can then manage the neutral spine posture, because again, this is what I want people to understand. First of all, spine posture. Not have to worry about anything else. So we would use a plank, we would use a bird dog for that. What we can then do is then wrap around that bracing. So we've got the neutral spine posture, we then go into learning how to brace. So the abdominal wall, the shoulders back and down for the traps, the rhomboids and the lats, and then we might squeeze the glutes to activate glute max, not necessarily glute medius, but there will be a part of it in there, and glute minimus. So we're building that. So they might just be able to get into the position first. Then we've got to get them in the right spine position. We might only do that 10 seconds at a time. What we would then do, once they can start to hold it, we'll say, right, go up into the position, into that neutral spine position. Right, now think about pulling the tummy in tight and bracing the abdominals. Once we've got that, we would then layer on shoulders back and down, so on and so forth. So that's, in a sense, the sort of the teaching process that I take people on. We're learning the abdominal bracing, and once we've got that, we then move into breathing. So again, with the plank, with the side plank, and in some respects with the bird dog and the bridge, people will hold their breath. Now, when people are holding their breath, it doesn't make the exercise as effective as it could be. So we need to get them breathing. So once we're braced, we also need to breathe. So we then add that as another layer on top. So I'm just talking about the foundation of what people need to learn, but there's also layers to that. And what I'm trying to do is do it in a way that's manageable for the person, because if they're a beginner, they don't really know what exercise is, so they need to be able to do it in small little chunks. So all I've basically done is taken all the components that are required and broken them up into their individual components, and then I start knitting them back together as we go through. But I need to do it in that way because then it makes more sense to be able to learn it rather than just being thrown in the deep end. We can sort of learn in bite-sized chunks. So we learn to breathe. We then start having multiple muscles working. So we're looking at abdominal wall. We've got rectus abdominis. We've got external and internal obliques with that. If we're putting shoulders back and down, we've got rhomboids and traps. If we're squeezing the glutes, we've got the glutes involved as well. So we've got multiple muscles, and then we can add those into side plank, bridge, and even bird dog as well. With those 4 exercises, we're moving it around, as I've mentioned. So we've got anterior, lateral, and posterior muscles. We're integrating hips and shoulders into the torso. So I've already talked about bracing and shoulders back and down and squeezing the glutes. So we're integrating the hips into the torso already. When we go into the bird dog, we're then adding movement into that. So we're maintaining the neutral posture of the spine, and then we're moving the shoulder and the hip joint on each end of that, and we're doing it on opposite sides of the body. So that starts to take a little bit more in the way of brain power. So again, not to overwhelm them, we would do it in layers, and in some respects we would do it in isolation, so we would just do it with the bird dog. So we are taking that exercise, or those exercises, and integrating shoulders and hips. As an occurrence of that and practicing those exercises, we're building joint stability, spine, hip, shoulder, and we're building endurance. And that again is just a natural consequence of doing those exercises over a period of time whilst we're learning mind-muscle connection, joint awareness, learning to brace, learning to breathe, getting multiple muscles working muscles at the front, side and back, and then integrating the shoulders as well. So just by doing that and having to hold the exercise for longer, you're building the joint stability and you're building the core endurance that's required for good quality core stability. As I've mentioned, those 4 exercises, because they're simple, they don't take a lot of brain power, we can then progress them. We can make them more dynamic. So we can go up into a side plank, and then we could roll from a side plank down into a plank. And vice versa, we can do that from a plank position, and we can roll up into a side plank. So again, we're starting to create that movement of core stability around. We're also, if we're doing the bridges and we're lifting one leg up, putting one leg down, lifting the other leg up, again, we're moving it from side to side. We're engaging people, not in just squeezing both glutes, but engaging one glute and then the other. So again, that mind-muscle connection is going from left side to right side, so on and so forth. So we can start to advance those exercises. When it comes to the bird dog, we would start with a wide stance, more sort of base of support, and then we can bring the hands and legs, or hands closer together and then knees closer together to again reduce the base of support, increase the amount of stability that's required from the body. We could close the eyes as well, add that layer on top, take away a stimulus. It's going to make them work a little bit harder. So even just in those 4 exercises, you've kind of got levels to it where you can progress that. But what we would do now, if we are we've sort of mastered those 4 exercises, we're starting to progress those exercises, we could start to layer on movement. Now you can layer on movement even before that, as we're learning those exercises as well. That all comes down to the individual that's being trained. Now we've got very let's just say universal movements. There's our body can do 101 different movements, but it comes down to 8 very sort of simple basic concepts of movement: lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling, rotating, getting up, walking and running. Those are the 8 basic movements that the body has. It can do them in many different ways. It can lift a weight from the floor with sort of feet hip width apart. You may have to do it with a much wider stance because you're just going down to one side, but you're still lifting a weight from the floor, and there are still concepts and sort of teaching points that are required to be able to do that. And then again, because we are changing foot position, that's going to require different amounts of stability in different parts of the torso as well. So you get all of that layer on, but that's for to be talked about at a different time. So we've got all those different movements that we then need to layer on top, but we still need to keep the foundation that we've talked about before. So we need to think about all those previous points that we've done before, and we need to apply them. So as I've mentioned before, we're not throwing them in the deep end. We're not saying, right, here's a heavy weight, I want you to remember point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. What we're saying to them is, now that we've learned all of this stuff, now we can apply that into this. So the bracing, the joint awareness, we've got all of that. Now all we've got to do is get them in a position and then lift the weight. So it's very much doing that with lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling, rotating, getting up, walking and running. So we're now taking that to another level, and we can do that with a deadlift. We could do that with cable machines. We could do that with kettlebells, carrying them, suitcase carries, rack carries, overhead carries, all these different types of carries. So it really starts to expand out how we can stabilize shoulder, spine, hip, spine, shoulder, shoulder, spine, hip, so on and so forth. We can do it from the ground up. We can do it from the top down. So this is why core stability isn't down to one exercise. As I've just been talking there, yes, I've talked about 4 basic exercises, but I've then talked about 8 different types of movement, which could be many different exercises could be used to be able to fulfill those movements. Because as I've mentioned, we've got sort of a traditional deadlift. You've got sort of a lift from kneeling on the floor, or from sort of half kneeling on one knee. You could lift. You could lift with a split stance. You could lift with a wide stance. You've got all these different ways of doing it. It's going to require different stabilizing mechanisms through the hip, spine, and shoulders. Now, again, this conversation could go off in any tangent, so I don't want to spend all my time talking about that, because I've given the general concepts of that, and then it's down to you, the person, to go and explore that. But I would always recommend building that foundation first, and I use those 4 exercises: the plank, the side plank, the bridge, and the bird dog. And I do it for mind-muscle connection. I do it for building a basic joint and movement awareness, learning the abdominal brace, learning to brace and breathe, using multiple muscles at any one time on the front, the side, and the back. And also you've then got counter rotation as well, integrating shoulders and hips into the spine, and then building joint stability and building core endurance as well. So all of those things are going toward building stability, and then layering on top lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling, getting up, rotating, walking, and running. So that is why core stability is much more than just one exercise. So hopefully that's been helpful. If you do have questions, leave them in the comment section below. I'm more than happy to answer them. If you want to find out more about the 12-week Core Strength and Stability program, click the link in the description. You'll find it on my website. You can enroll straight away, get started, start building core strength and stability. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris from Christopher Holt Training. I will speak to you in the next tutorial.